Welcome to the UBCP ACTRA Diversity Panel. First, we'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Today, it's the Indigenous panel, but let's actually start right there with, does that category work for you?
Indigenous, though, just means that you are from this land. Isn't that what the definition of Indigenous means? I mean, you can be Indigenous to any place. Mm-hmm. So I don't find offense in that word at all. It's just, when somebody asks me what my background is and I say, my father's Wet'suwet'en, and that opens up a whole other conversation because nobody knows what that means, right? And if I want to go into my family history, my dad's Native, my mom's non-Native, and all of that, it's much easier to just say Native. People know what Native means.
It's hard because how else do you define a group of people? Because otherwise we would all go by our own nations, right? But I don't know. I think Indigenous is the word to use at this point for a group. It's like a gaggle.
Gaggle of Indians?
A gaggle, yeah.
Well, Trevor, you look like...
I was really opinionated about it before because these seemed like labels that somebody else kind of came up for us, like First Nations or Aboriginal. That became like the key word for everyone to say about us. And now it's Indigenous. But then collectively as like a group of people, I don't really feel like we came up with the term Indigenous. It was just something that maybe someone in the government maybe came up with, or somebody that was trying to be very political about it just came up with the term for us. And I don't really feel that it necessarily reflects everybody as a whole.
Truth.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So what do you think we should be called?
Well, Indigenous right now is fine, but whatever you feel like you want to be called is really how you want to be addressed. Like if you want to be addressed by your tribe or your band or overall as Indigenous, then you can just let somebody know that. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I don't really know what your ethnic background is, but I wouldn't just presume to make that assumption right off the bat by saying, hey, are you Middle Eastern or whatever. I would just say, address you as a person. I think that's really what we want to be addressed as, mindful of. Well, we just want to be people. We're just humans. People. We're people like everybody else. It's just we have a different background.
Yeah. Elle-Maija, what do you think?
Well, I mean, Indigenous it's a term that has very specific meaning within a socio-political context, like especially when we're thinking about global Indigenous rights in the United Nations and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So Indigenous has a very specific place within that framework. And I'm very proud to be Indigenous. I think being part of a collective like that is something that I'm very proud of. But like Michelle was saying, I think when it comes to my personal identity, I identify with my nations, which is Nitsitapi or Blackfoot and Sami, and that's who I am first and foremost. But I do think that Indigenous is an appropriate term to be using right now. And when we're thinking about socio-political meanings within that term, Indigenous, it specifically reflects community and collective rights. I could go on and on about it, but I think Indigenous is appropriate. That being said, when we're talking about diversity, it is kind of strange that we're all kind of like lumped into my identity is so much more complex than just being an Indigenous person, and I think that's the same for all of us. So it is strange to have to speak within that, but then again, that speaks to our own lived experiences as Indigenous performers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like the term Indigenous is relatively recent in terms of being popularly used. I mean, all of you have been in movies or features that have the title Indian, the word Indian in the title, I should say. And does that word still have a sort of, warmth in your own community if it's other people from that community or that identity using it?
Well, back in the day, natives didn't take offense to it, but eventually they did. I mean, most part. But you know, here we are today. What's in a word, right? And that's what you look at. You have to research what is in a word. Why you call these? Why they refer you to these certain things like savage. If anybody, they think, oh, savage. He's like, ah. But if you look at it in French, it means knowledge of the woods. That's what it means. This person knows the woods. Sauvage. So when they call us savages, I own that word. When they call me an Indian, I own that word. If they call me indigenous, I will own that word. You can call me anything you want. I am that word, if you want me to be. But I don't find offense to it anymore, because I know who I am. But I do say, know where you're at, because I wouldn't go to some other country and not know where I'm going and call them all one thing, when not knowing that they're from a distinct tribe or place. I wouldn't just say, you're all these Middle Eastern people. So that's the difference. Ignorance, respect, all that kind of stuff comes into play. And that should be everybody doing that when they come to a foreign country or anywhere in this world. So it's up to you to call us whatever you want. You know, just don't be ignorant.
I used to be taught at UBC journalism, and there was a professor there, Duncan McHugh, who told me that one time he was speaking to an elder, and an elder told him that the only way an Indigenous person would make the news is if he or she was one of the 4 Ds: drumming, dancing, drunk, or dead. Now, Duncan was thinking at first, no, we've, you know, I myself as an Indigenous reporter have done these, you know, stories that are not that. But and I'm wondering, you know, that's news media, but what about film and television? Those 4 Ds, dancing, drumming, drunk, or dead, do they show up, you know, in
I've played
your
them
work?
all.
Yeah, yeah, you have.
Can you tell me a bit about that, Michelle? What do you, how do you deal with that, I guess?
When I began, back in the very late 80s, there were not a lot of roles at all for Indigenous people. That was like prior to Dances with Wolves, which is what I always say would open the door for us as actors. So I think now, hopefully, we're evolving to a place where we can begin to play human beings, which is what I would love to see, and not having to be drunk, drumming, dead, or dancing. Because I know all of us, we get called in for the guest stars, the shaman roles, and oh my gosh, I could go on and on about that.
Hate those.
I know, I'm so tired of that stuff. But I think we're evolving a lot, and it's time for us to just be humans who happen to be Indigenous or happen to be Wet'suwet'en or Cree or Mississippi. Nehio, yeah, okay.
Right, and there's this always, as if we're looking to the past, like there's so many roles that are still based in the past of how Indigenous people lived back in the day.
Because they try and keep us in this box, right, of what, like, when it's being controlled by non-native funding, producing, or the storytelling, then they will try and put us into the box of what they think Indigenous people are supposed to be to sell it to the audiences. But we now have so many of our own filmmakers, such as, you know, Elle-Maija here, and a lot of up-and-coming filmmakers too, who are exploring other ways to identify now, and I think that's so important. We are not going to stay in a box anymore.
And are you finding that the gatekeepers of the industry are actually open to, you know, the kinds of stories that you want to tell?
I think they have to be, because of all of the work that has been done within our community. So everything Michelle was saying makes so much sense, and I absolutely agree with everything she said. I think it's wonderful to be here in this space with people, with all the people in this room, because they've had such a profound impact on the industry and representations of Indigenous people. And yeah, going back to those representations that you listed, it's happened for decades since the beginning of film. Indigenous people have been depicted in this fetishistic, romanticized, and often racist ways, and those representations have deep and profound impacts on our wellness. And the reason I got into filmmaking was because I became so frustrated with the industry as an actor, I've been working in the industry now for 14 years. And in those early days, going out for auditions, I wasn't fully able to articulate what made me so frustrated with the industry, but I felt, at the core, it has to do with racism and sexism. So I ended up going back to school and studying Indigenous studies and women's and gender studies. And it was during that time that I was able to contextualize all of those feelings that I had, feelings of being marginalized and not heard and being misrepresented in such damaging ways. And so I stepped away. My grandma kept saying, like, when are you going to do something real? Because in her mind, acting wasn't real.
Totally.
So I went back to school and I ended up making a short film and had this incredible experience of feeling like I had agency, like I had power, like I was in control of the way that I wanted to be represented. And it was from there that I just continued to build and work towards something bigger. And again, going back to the question about gatekeepers, there's been so much work within the Indigenous film community that has led to pressuring funding agencies like Telefilm, changing institutions like the National Film Board, and building tools that non-Indigenous people within the film industry can use. So now the Imaginative Film Festival has the Pathways and Protocols document, which is for non-Indigenous people wanting to work with Indigenous communities or wanting to tell stories that represent Indigenous people, and to do so in a meaningful way, in a respectful way, and one that actually goes beyond just like consulting and inclusion, but one that is meeting us in a way that essentially represents like a nation-to-nation relationship within the film industry. So yeah, I think we're in a really interesting time right now. There's a lot of change happening, and again, it all goes back to all these people who have worked so hard to advocate and fight for change.
Right. In a way, I can't shake the feeling that it's just like a imposed sort of double standard, or like maybe an additional burden to be not only an actor, but then have to also create your own opportunities so that you can have fulfilling acting roles in a sense. Like, it's not enough to just be an actor. And it's not something that I believe that most white actors have to deal with. They could just be actors and probably get, some fulfilling roles at some point in time. What do you think, Trevor?
I have like a catch-22 with that, because sometimes I feel like now is our time to shine, right? Now is a great opportunity for us to like tell our stories and be successful, but I kind of get the feeling like it's only because they're giving it to us now. Like somebody's giving us something, because maybe like they feel like obviously we have been misrepresented for like a number of years, but they're just kind of like, it's their time now. Let them kind of do their thing for a while. Like, we've already had our shot. But part of it also is I just feel like the people, the ethnicities, like I'm just gonna say white people that are in power, that have been producers, directors, et cetera, for a number of years. I just feel like all the other ethnicities are coming up right now, and those minorities are no longer going to be the minorities, and the people that are the majorities are just slowly finding that their population is slowly becoming the minority. So the tables are slowly turning for us, for everybody.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say they're giving it to us, though.
No, but
I mean, you look at the statistics, and we are still deeply underrepresented in terms of calling the shots and actually directing, writing, acting, all of that. So I think we're still fighting pretty hard for it, and these industries the industry's forced to listen to us.
Yeah, we're like years away from where we should be at.
Yeah.
I feel like right now, I don't know, I haven't met too many producers or directors that are beyond the independent level.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever met a producer that is like from Hollywood that's Indigenous, or a director. I don't think I've ever met like a director.
Taika Waititi.
Okay.
We have Taika.
Okay, there's one, right?
Yeah.
But that one is like
Heather
one
Waite's doing really
on
important
a
work.
single hand, right? On a single hand, there's only one that we can think of. I'd like to see like multiple hands. I'd like to see a whole bunch of different directors that we can refer to, or people that are like our inspirations or idols for us to like attain to.
And when you think about too, like I always talk about how we have these veterans in our business, right? I always talk about Tantu, Gary Farmer, Graham Greene, August Schellenberg, Gordon Tatusis, Chief Dan George. Those were the ones that really kicked those doors down for us. And I think watching the growth of the industry and watching everybody that we all know who've been working in the industry, I think we've been doing a great job. Like I really think that we have come a long ways with very little resources and a huge amount of roadblocks along the way, challenges. I think we've done quite well, and to see all the young ones that are coming up now, it just makes me so happy.
You've actually had quite a range of characters too. You've had characters that are
Well,
not.
because I decided right from the get-go, after about 5 years of just starting out right after Dances with Wolves, where I was playing several of the buckskin Pocahontas roles, and I decided right then and there that I don't want to be labeled as a Native actor, an Indigenous actor. I don't want to be the Indian princess, and I took responsibility for my career, and I changed it. I chopped off all my hair, and I decided I wasn't going to do those anymore. I wanted to play doctors and lawyers and those kinds of roles, and it worked.
And what was your strategy to persuade the people, who are making those decisions, those casting?
I think I just shifted my energy. My energy said, I'm not going to give in to this idea of who you think I am, and I'm not going to allow you to put me in that box. And so I told my agent to start sending me out for everything.
But you got a look that's completely different.
I do have that.
You can play all different types of people, and that's
and
wonderful.
I think
about
I
you.
was an outlier in that way, that I did have a very sort of diverse look. I don't fit in just that Indigenous look. So I was lucky.
Ethnically ambiguous look, or whatever you would call that.
I was very, very, very fortunate. And it's not the norm for most Indigenous actors, for sure.
It's not. You can't really control that. Who can control the way they were born? And if you look visibly one way versus where it could pass in another way.
But that's the other thing too, is like I've never been Indian enough for the Indians, and I've never been white enough for the whites. So like, I've had my own struggles in that way.
Nathaniel, looks like you have something to say.
Oh no, I'm listening. I'm agreeing. That's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Right?
Almost, but
That seems to be a lot of us, because when you look at the industry, there's so many of us that are mixed blood.
Yeah.
And we both walk in various worlds.
I might
right?
be mixed blood, but I always say I'm a Nehio.
Well, totally. I say the same
I was
thing.
born. Nobody ever told me I was a white man. I'm like Native all through and through, and I believe that, and it's what you believe, right?
But we still have French blood in us.
We have French or
and
English blood.
I have Scottish blood in me.
So I think that's where some of our, the other thing, in terms of whatever, talents or, like anything kind of that. I think that's mixed in your blood. You get that in our demeanor, way we are today. A lot of us younger generations, there's no real full bloods anymore out there. They're all going extinct, most of them. And this is what the product of us natives have become. We are mixed blood, and that goes for anywhere and across the world. The only people are the same are those Amazon tribes that are getting wiped out for their forests. Yeah, no contact.
Yeah, that's
those
about it.
those are the pure blood. Yeah, but otherwise everybody's mixed blood. Everybody in this room is mixed blood. So I mean, for me, but I portray an Indian. I'm a Native man, and
yet you are still boxed in. That's the thing. It's like we're all mixed. We're woke to these new ideas. Yet, nonetheless, you will still be put a lot of times like, what's the casting call you're going to get, right?
Yeah. Well, that's for the Carmen said too before. I put my foot down on playing the Native roles at an early stage in my career too. Like I was going up for all these Native roles, and they're all buckskin, riding horses and stuff, and I'm like, I love riding horse, don't get me wrong, I love shooting bow and arrows and rifles off of a horse, but I'd rather play a cop driving a
do so
car,
much more.
or a lawyer in a courtroom, or something that's more challenging to me to spit out words and play a character that's unlike a native guy. That's what I do. I've been doing that now in my career. I know that I played those warriors, and I can play a scientist or a lawyer or a professor.
I know native lawyers in real life. They exist.
Yes.
And
Totally.
And recently, a FBI agent, where that's for me, that's amazing. Like, I've come a long way in my career too, and a lot of all of us here, I've seen them all grow. I've seen Michelle grow. I've seen Carmen grow in their performance, as well as their characters that they portray on TV and stuff. And I'm like, we're here. We've been doing this 30 years, all three of us here, I know for a fact we've been here 30 years.
I started when I was 5.
There you go, see? 35. So,
Did you find that when you, have you had your hair longer before, and that you get called or you get typecast in those roles before with longer hair as opposed to shorter hair?
first time I met my agent, he said, grow your hair. So I grew my hair. And after a while, I was like, I don't want long hair. I like short hair. And I eventually fought for my short hair. You know, I was like, they have such things, fucking wigs, man. So put a wig on me, please.
My agent almost cried when I cut my hair off. But then, like, within a week or two, I was book, all these roles. And she's like, oh, okay, you're all right then. Phew.
I just want to say, in terms of that, too, and putting a wig on and chopping your hair and growing your hair out, you see on these movies nowadays, who wears makeup in 1845? They make all the white people look all this glamorous, and they make the natives look all dirty, and they try to put shit on your teeth and your fucking hands like we're dirty. Like we grew up dirty and we're dirty. No, we were clean. We taught the people that came here how to be clean, how to wash, how to use the gum from the trees to brush your teeth, which they turned into toothpaste eventually. So people don't remember that natives taught a lot of these people how to live from this land and how to just be human beings in the first place.
Totally.
Anyway,
How to smell nice.
Well, it's getting into a topic which I think is a challenging one, which is what does it mean to be authentically Indigenous? Or
Has to be respectful. Like when they portray us, it has to be a respectful way.
Well, we should be portraying ourselves. We should be writing the scripts. We should be producing. We should be directing. That's when it's authentic, is when it's coming from us.
or taught a language by the real people themselves and not some person who researched it and not even that nation. That's offensive to me. And I don't like that when I got a white woman trying to teach me how to speak a certain language, and I'm like,
That's happened
what the
to you?
hell? I'm like, what?
What?
Why is she teaching me a Mohawk language and she's correcting me how to say it when I've heard that word a million motherfucking times and I know what it sounds like, and she's correcting me? I'm like, okay, all right, that's
I've
fine.
never seen that before. That's
Well, I have.
crazy.
I just
So curious to know what show that was.
Yeah.
I won't say it, but okay.
you can spill the tea after.
I think that's offensive to me, and I don't agree with that. I think, especially when you're a native person, you should go, if you're going to play a Mohawk or you're going to play or any other nation in this, and what I was taught right away, because my grandfather, one of my grandfathers knew this, and my grandmother, they said, when you go portray another nation, you go up to their elders and you give them a rock and some tobacco, and they'll know exactly what you're going to do and what you're doing there. And you sit down there and you listen to all their stories that they tell you until they're done. And I did that. Every time I go, I did that to Lakota, I did that to Apache, all these other nations. I always try to locate their elder and I give them that honor, and so they can bless me that I portray their people the right way, even if I have to do hand signals and stuff and talk with my hands, and they teach me that stuff, right? And I bring that to the characters, right? Yeah. That's what it's all about, right? And that's what that in between, and all of our, in the people that are native and know these things, we do that anyway, and so anyway.
That's true.
So, who determines who gets to play? Who determines who gets to play a part in a sense, whether it's an Indigenous part or a non-Indigenous part?
Producer directors.
Directors.
Yeah.
The ones in power.
The ones with the cash, yeah.
But I've seen productions called out, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, like theater, I'll just use theater for an example, when They wanted to do the Res Sisters with an all-white cast. That was pretty painful. Yeah, and I had a debate with Thompson about it, the writer of the script. He thought it was an amazing idea. And my whole thing was, and I respect Thompson, and I've done the Res Sisters, but my whole thing is we carry our stories in our DNA. We carry our stories in who we are. And so a white woman could play that role, but she couldn't play it with the amount of history and ancestors that I bring with me when I do the story. So that to me is really how I see it. And I feel the same way about other roles too, though. I mean, like, I think I personally don't think it's good to play a Latin role because I'm not Latino and I don't carry those stories with me. So that to me, until we figure out that balance in the world, because right now it's like the scales were like this, where Indigenous people and then the people in power, and now they're slowly starting to go like this. And when they get to be here, then we can discuss, playing other ethnicities other than human. And I'm going to say that, right? Human is, what I was saying of playing just a doctor or a human being. But I'm not going to go and portray an Asian woman or a Polynesian woman because I don't carry those stories in my DNA. So that's my
Could you play a man?
Can I play man?
Yeah, like if somebody, forget about ethnicities, we were just
I could pretend, but I could not portray a man because I have never been a man. So, I mean, I know I'm an actor and you're supposed to be able to shape-shift and be, a shapeshifter. But until that balance is figured out, as far as what I'm saying with us having agency and control over our own stories, when that feels like it's balanced, then we can discuss other people stepping in and trying to understand those characters. That's how I feel. That's my opinion. So. Could you play a woman?
I could.
Yeah. I could too. I could play a man. I could totally do it. Yeah. But I couldn't reach deep in my soul and pull the story out of what a man goes through.
It depends on like what level of challenge you wanted to undertake with the whole thing as well. Like if you really wanted to like always go out for man roles, that would be a
I would
really
have
unique
men
challenge.
pissed off at me.
If
they were fighting for one role, if there was 6 men fighting for that one male role, and I walked in and said, "Oh, I can do it," and took that role, I mean that's the same thing, right? That's how I feel. It's like allow those men who've been fighting for that role to empower themselves to play that role before I step in.
But at the same time, especially when you're starting out as an actor, you need anything you can get, right? It's maybe not as much of a choice. Like it's like I need to put money on the table. I need to pay my rent. So in a way, don't you have to balance that aspect too when you're just trying to survive, especially coming up in an industry that is not very forgiving?
What's the moral thing about it too? Sometimes you want to just I want to pay my bills, but then there's that morality thing, and then you don't want to disrespect and stuff, and that's a huge thing in Native culture, and a lot of us. We have that heart and that we think about things and we're respectful for things, so we tend to like back away and say, who would do that? And then somebody else steps in, you're like, fuck, I should have took it.
Right, no, that's what I mean. Like, then there goes like an opportunity. Who knows what that opportunity could have led to as well, right?
Yeah, and in terms of portraying another race, though, it's it's that respecting. And I've actually played a Japanese person in a movie, and I had to be, Japanese. But they just, I was weirded out by it. But at first, I'd be like, that's a cool role, But then another time, I played a Latino or Spanish person, but it was so neutral that it could have been a native guy too, right? But I grew my facial hair, right?
Point though, right?
Yeah,
Too. I think it really depends on the story as well. If it's an Indigenous story and it calls for somebody who is very knowledgeable about what those people have been through and need to know the language and that type of thing, I think it's very important to cast someone from that nation, or at least do the search for somebody who can speak the language and who knows the stories and can portray that. If they've done the search and they can't find what they're looking for, if they can't find the right look, then I think it's okay to look outside. And I have played many, many different nationalities throughout my career.
Well, on the other
right?
hand, too, yeah. And on that note, I remember auditioning for that movie, the Polynesian character. It was like based on that book about about a young Polynesian guy. This is the island of some sort. I can't remember the book. It's based on a popular book. Anyway, the characters, they're all native, right? The whole thing. It's a whole native thing. And then it's like, I mean, I think it's about first contact eventually with French or something. But this character is native, and I got the role. Did the audition. They flew me to, I think it was Los Angeles, and talked to the director, producer. I got the role. They're like, yes, wow, I love your acting, blah, 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 okay. Next thing you know, I'm going home, and then 2 weeks later, my agent calls me, he says, you lost the role. And I was like, what? The director's nephew stepped in by the name of Henry Thomas, who took the role, because he asked to play this character. So I lost out to the non-native for a native role. Could have been native, but he's Polynesian. He's closer to native than, well, but that's the kind of stuff I've gone through too in my career. You get replaced by somebody else, and they're not even native, you know. And these girls, especially, you know, we can name a few names. There's some girls out there, imposters. You know, I say imposters because they say they're native, but they're not even their pinky toe is native, you know. So how can you go around saying that you are and taking these roles from this woman out of this woman? You know, that's not rightfully theirs. We're portraying a nation or people, right? And
this is a real problem where there's people impersonating being Indigenous.
Going on
and getting, yeah, and it's been going on for ages.
But recently, though, we get to play our own people now.
Right.
You know, that's the difference from yesterday to today. You know, so.
I imagine it could be awkward though, like if in a way, imagine you're going to a casting and it's like, okay, prove your indigeneity.
There's a really interesting article by an Indigenous Australian named Tanya Karas, I think, and she wrote this really beautiful article called "Diversity is a White Word," and you know I'm gonna ruin it, but basically, essentially, she's saying that the term diversity again normalizes whiteness. It makes whiteness the norm, and diversity. Essentially is a way at looking at the other through a white lens in a way that is convenient for the white majority. So going back to racial essentialism, they look at us in a way that's convenient for them, that's acceptable on their terms. And I think we're in a really interesting place where that doesn't have to happen anymore. You know, we have so many of our own people telling our stories and working our way into positions of power where we have control over the narrative. And you know, I'm really not comfortable with playing someone who isn't like I would never play an Asian character. I would never play anyone who isn't Indigenous. Essentially, I think that's a really interesting conversation to be having right now. Like, who has the right within our own Indigenous nations to portray each other? But I'm happy to have booked the role. I'm really excited about it. Yeah. But I do think there's a lot to be learned on my part. A lot of self-interrogation and reflection on who has the right to tell these stories. Yeah, going back to the words diversity and inclusion, I'm really uncomfortable with using those words, and I just don't use them because it's othering myself. I don't. It's a form of disempowerment. But I understand that that's maybe the language that we have to use. I don't go out for probably 75% of the auditions that I get called in for, specifically because I feel like I am compromising my own integrity, I'm compromising my people's integrity, and I want to build something better for generations to come. So how do we build these systems of accountability? How do we hold casting directors accountable? Casting directors don't have to agree to take a project if they know that there are damaging representations of any people within those projects. How do we hold producers and directors accountable? I think that's happening, but within the context of UBCP and us being performers, how do we build that within our community? And this is one way, but I think we need to keep pushing to find solutions.
And I think it's super interesting because you're young. So you have the privilege to step away from certain roles because of where you've walked into this journey, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas we came from a much, and Tantu, you know, they came from such a long, like, the roles that were available back then.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting for your generation,
Yeah,
right? To be able to have
absolutely.
that privilege.
Have
And the
the
next
choice.
generation to
But
come.
I also want to address is how painful it is for us as artists to be placed into a situation where we have to fight tooth and nail against this huge, white, powerful. I just went through this on a television series that I was on for a few seasons that's out of Europe from Sky Television. And they gave us, you know, in the second season, they gave me this scenario, and I'm like, oh my God, you want me to, so that you can take this back to your European audience and glorify the subject of missing and murdered Indigenous women? I'm the one that has to deal with it within my own people, my own community. And it turned into this huge meeting with the producers, and then me and the other Native actress on the show threatening to walk. Like it got that intense.
Yeah.
And then, you know, in tears. And I'm like, emotionally, I'm putting myself through something that is so painful, that affects my life, my family, everyone I know. But them, it's just a story,
Yeah.
you know? And that, to me, again, is about how we carry within our DNA these things. And it's so hard. And if they could have hired anybody, you know, to go up and do that story, they could have hired, you know, an actress who doesn't know about her culture or is portraying a Native person but kind of looks like a Native person but isn't, and she would have done it like that.
Yeah.
Right? So that, to me, is really painful to be placed into those situations. We should not have to be fighting like that. So straight up, UBC, create something to help.
I think with all that, you know, in terms of being an actor in this industry, we got to realize though too that this is not our industry in the first place, and that but it also at the same time, as Native people, we've been storytellers from the beginning of times.
Years, yeah.
So we have our own interpretation and ways of doing storytelling, but also you got to think about it though too, that this is an entertainment industry. You know, there's room for being serious and telling the truth over here, but there's also room for having some fun and just making up stories too. And you can play anybody you want. You could be a gnome if you want, or an orc, or an elf, whatever. Are you gonna offend them? A dragon. I'd love to play a dragon in a movie one time.
And yet a fantasy show like Game of Thrones is mostly white people.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't they have a native guy in Game of Thrones, you know? Just throw a native guy. What do they do? Jason Momoa, he's he's native. Nobody thinks about that, but he is a native. But there, like, you know, there needs to be more presence of native anything, because these stories are far-fetched anyway. They're fantasy, and people got to realize acting is just acting. It's not saving the world. Unless you are actually out there saving the world, remember that it's just a fantasy.
I completely disagree with you. Oh my God, Nathaniel. Oh my God.
But you have the room to tell stories that matter, right? And then you have the mindless entertainment of it all, and there's all of it, right? And there's a huge spectrum.
Huge spectrum, yeah.
And that's what actors, as our actors, we choose and pick our roles, and over the video, over here, over there.
If we're lucky enough to be able to pick and choose our
I know,
roles.
but it's still, we want to play these roles that are like this, like doctor, lawyer, spaceman, whatever, Martians, and all these kind of things. I want to play them all.
Michelle, you were about to disagree.
She looks mad.
And you look like you're very...
No, I'm just thinking so much of my work has been about contributing to the solution.
Yeah.
That's what I do. And that's the reason I got into this business. It wasn't to go play a gnome or to play a dragon. It was to do something that is going to contribute to all of the stuff that my family has to deal with. And you know that, because you do the same thing. So I think that we, as Indigenous actors, are not going to go out there and just do Shakespeare for the love of fucking creating. It's because everything I do is to make the road easier for my daughters, so that they don't have to carry the baggage that I've had to carry in my life, or my mother has had to carry. So to me, if I'm doing something, it has to have the weight of what is this effect going to have on my daughters, right? And so yeah, everything I do, and all of us here, you know, I mean, for myself, I don't depend on the film industry, right? Like I've got 3-4 one-woman shows that I created that I take into community, and I work with youth, and you know, all of us do this work with the youth where we speak to them, we empower them, it's always about contributing back to the center, and that's who we are, right? We always contribute back to the center of the circle.
Mm-hmm.
I've played those roles, and I still do, but I just want to have some fun once in a while. That's
Oh,
all
for
I need.
sure.
Yeah.
I don't
For
want to play
sure.
the serious native guy in a serious drama role all the time, or this native guy, whatever. I'm tired of playing the native guy because I
don't
am
wanna play
native already.
either.
It's
I want to play humans.
Yeah, playing humans,
Yeah.
and that's what I've been doing lately, and that's what I love doing with my job.
I
and
totally get that, yeah.
So anyway, I agree with you too. I mean, it's important that your character is portrayed as in a good light, especially in the subject. You know, like I've been in some shows where they try to like it's like, no, I wouldn't do. My character would not do that. You know, it's like you got to fight for that too, right? You know, it's like, why would you do that to my character in terms of where this show is going? There should be, you know, like you know, like a lot of these shows nowadays, they're depicting the native culture and the people and their reses and stuff, and it's always about this or that, and you know, the abuse and all that stuff. They always show the problem, never the solution. And there's communities out there actually doing something positive in their communities, and you know, and making, you know, headway for and being the leaders in their communities to show that communities can get together and build a better future for their children and their community. You know, that's why isn't that shown? You know, to encourage more Native people instead of showing always the bad shit. You know, it's like you know,
Because
it's like-
drama sells.
I know drama sells,
Yeah.
of course. You know, but
Well,
that's,
many of you have been involved with Blackstone, which was a very heavy drama
dramatic.
series. Yeah, I mean, could you imagine something that's a bit more like a total opposite of that in a sense, like a more like
I want to do it.
like for example, like an Indigenous
Write it.
version of Friends.
Write it.
I
Yeah.
don't know, just
Yeah,
something
comedy,
fun.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, like
They should have
as a writer, you
They have
must
something
be-
like a Crazy Rich Natives. Like natives win the lottery, and then they live the life of like the Crazy Rich Asians. They just have an extravagant lifestyle, and they're the exact opposite of what we're actually portrayed in film. That would be something that would be. I would write that. That's something
and
that
that-
would be challenging and entertaining and fun.
like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we have the best sense of humor. You know, when you think about sitting around with Indigenous people, we got this great sense of humor. We need more comedy. I want to do
Yeah.
more comedy, man.
Comedy's fun.
Create it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
it sounds like the burden again has to be on.
On Michelle. Michelle's taking the world on.
But actually, okay, well, is there a way though, like, I mean, I'm a person of color, and there's all these people of color now starting to write their own shows or create their own shows. How can other people of color kind of maybe ally up or find ways to partner and tell those kinds of stories, or just more human stories?
There's so many similarities between like First Nations culture and like African American, the kind of struggles that we've all gone through over the years. I just had this conversation with another, what is the ethnicity that I have to call them, right? Another person that is a person of color, about their ethnicities and how there's so many similarities between these two cultures, and then what could we all do together to create like some kind of intermingled story together, just to create something, because all of the other, I mean, let's just say white people have like been telling their stories for years, and now it's like our time to like bring something else together that is totally, completely different, and we can do that together by just having these kind of conversations. But
I'm sure it's happening somewhere.
It
I'm sure it's
probably is.
almost greenlit somewhere. There's a script coming out where it's going to happen, I bet you.
hopefully,
I
yes.
mean, you brought up Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I was watching that when I was in Dubai growing up. I mean, it's incredible how a show like that, seeing an African American family, a rich and wealthy African American family, being portrayed like that, and it was one of my favorite shows growing up. I still go back and watch that show.
at the 70s.
You need that kind of commercial success, don't you, to make the biggest-
Cosby's. Yeah.
Well, before that even, there was the Jeffersons. And then before that, it was like,
Favorite.
what was the other one with, there was a bunch of other black sitcoms.
Black
back in the
Family.
70s and into the 80s, the Cosby's came out, and that was like huge. And then what was A Different World?
Yeah,
And then the
spin-off.
French Prince of Bel-Air, and it was like in these cross, and that's what I want to see too, and envision that our native people will start producing these and be self-producing and become part of more of the industry itself, and
We're allowed to smile.
And we're allowed to smile and do all these, you know, fun things and portray our people more in a better light that we want to see as well. Portray the stories that are dark, but of course, have some fun with it, you know? It's like, and
I
that's
think
what it's
that's
about.
again, we're evolving slowly, right? Like, who knew 10 years ago or 15 years ago that we would all do Blackstone, which was indigenously written, produced, directed, acted? At that point, there'd never been anything in the world that had happened like that, and then we did it. And now, you know, like, other things are coming. It's about evolving. We can only go as fast as we can. So I think it's time now for us to have people like Elle-Maija coming up and doing a feature film where she's directing and acting in it. You know, like, that to me is amazing. All of us
Give
here.
me my agent's number.
I kind of wanted to continue the thing that Trevor started, which was like almost this pie in the sky. Like, what would be the dream project or something that you'd like? When you said, I would love to write the Crazy Rich Indigenous.
I wrote a film called No Reservations.
And I was just about to get to that.
We flipped the switch on like pipelines and having an indigenous corporation build a pipeline underneath a rich white neighborhood, and it was really, really successful. The idea, the concept really just rung through with people because we were just turning the head on the corporations. We were just doing the exact opposite of what's being portrayed, but I did it in like kind of a comedic way, so then we were poking fun at it, both from our side and their side as well, and it just resonated with people, just seeing those opposite ends of the spectrum of like what is actually being, or what is actually happening, just showing that opposite end, you can have people relate to it in
By
such
any
a different way.
chance, did you hear from audiences or people that were like, you actually might have shifted my perspective on this because of that flip of the script?
Yeah, I did. You know, it's not for everybody, right? Some people liked the idea and some people didn't like the idea because they felt, you know, I was making fun of either indigenous people or making fun of whatever, but the idea, that wasn't like the idea. Like, the idea is to change people's perspective on what is actually happening, just to bring about some kind of change with flipping the perspective, yeah. I worked in casting for like 15 years, and this is all commercials. Like, we're talking about film and TV where we're talking about great characters and stuff, but then we're talking about commercials, which is like selling products and stuff. I'd never seen like a commercial ever geared towards like a First Nations person before. Like, we never see any like natives in commercials, unless it's for like a PSA or something like that.
I've done two.
Two, right?
One for TELUS, where I was on the phone and I answered like,
I remember that.
Yeah.
and then the other one was for Alberta Bank or something. And I'm on another fucking phone, but I'm going, my bank, my loan thing got approved, so I'm going, I throw the phone out.
Right.
Yeah,
You're
man.
really good at answering.
But what are the odds that like commercials are geared towards Native people? Like, it's selling product, it's all geared towards all these other cultures. But I'd like to see like some kind of representation. Well,
Because now they got all these same-sex couples in commercials. Have you guys noticed that?
Yeah.
It's so awesome.
Yeah.
But we do need more Indigenous representation, that's for
Like
sure.
business types, right? Like you see them successful, and you know they own their own business. I think I've seen some things like that recently, but
very few, like few,
And
yeah.
humans, not playing Native all the time. Like, it's just that happened to be a family that, whatever, I don't know. I'm so tired of it.
that's why we need to create
Yeah.
Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, native style or
right.
something. You know, like Grand Avenue was kind of like that, right?
So what would be the advice you'd want to share with the young generation of actors coming up, particularly Indigenous actors coming up?
I think something that I feel is really important for young up and coming is do not wait for the work, that create it. Don't sit around waiting and for the phone to ring or whatever, because in this business, you're going to get rejected so much. You got to have a really good, solid sense of who you are. And I do a lot of work with youth, but I always say, do not get into this business because you think you're pretty. Like, I've got so many young Native girls that come up and they're like, somebody said I should be an actor. And I'm like, oh my God, don't get into it because of that, because it'll kick the shit out of you. Got to get into it because you want to tell our stories from a really deep, truthful place. That's for me why, You know, that's what's going to hold you in the business, not because you think you're cute or you think you're going to be rich and famous and all that other stuff, because none of that matters. It's about telling our stories, I think, from a really honest place.
It's good advice for any actor, Indigenous or not.
Trevor?
You got to develop your skills. You got to develop, but not just your skills in like acting. I think what's just benefited me in like life in general is just like developing all your skills in like a bunch of different areas. So then when you actually go into the audition room, you have this like wealth of knowledge and you have this confidence that you were able to do whatever, something consistently for a number of years, but then always learning like new skills over and over again. So if you learn something new every year, just put that in the library and then start working on like your next level of skills, because then you're developing yourself not just as an actor but as a person, and that just brings so much to the table when you go out for an audition. They'll see it, and also keep yourself in good shape. Yeah.
I never got that.
You don't
You just did it naturally.
Yeah.
Well, Elle-Maija, you're already one of those, people who's creating your own work. I mean, how would you advise the people who are coming up right under?
Oh gosh, just be brave and be honest, and just stick to the work. Like Michelle was saying, it's tough. It's a really tough industry. I mean, Carmen, you were saying as well. It's like it's really hard, but if you stick to it, like eventually the opportunities will come. And this industry is ugly in so many ways. I mean, there's so much joy to be had, especially being on set, but there's so many ugly aspects of this industry that permeate across, all demographics. And it's just rooted in like capitalism and patriarchy and disempowerment and all of those things. But there's this idea of scarcity, that there's not enough, and people are pitted against each other, and actors feel like they gotta, compete. But I think we need to move beyond this idea of scarcity and really celebrate one another's accomplishments. And I think that happens especially with this group here. And celebrate our community, celebrate the people who are doing important things, who are demonstrating leadership. I also think that it's really important to lift others up, I think when you open a door, you got to be opening that door for everybody else behind you, and make sure you're bringing everybody in. And maybe not even open the door, just tear that whole door frame down and knock that wall down.
You mentioned kicking down doors several times. I think you need to make that part of your mantra for this. One last thing I wanted to touch on, because
I do want to say, I think in terms of like offering advice for young people, I think we also have so much to learn from young people. Again, like there are so many talented young people doing such important work right now. And on this feature that I co-wrote and co-directed with Kathleen Hepburn called The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, we did this open casting call for people who had never acted before, because we wanted to find a young woman who didn't fit the mold of a conventional actor, and who had kind of this raw honesty about her. And we saw so many incredible young women who were just brave enough to put themselves on camera and did a phenomenal job. So it's like, the talent is there. And I just really hope that I see these young women who audition for us just keep going in the industry, and just keep breaking down those walls, because I mean it's tough, it's tough for women, it's tough for people of color, it's tough for queer folks, it's tough for people with disabilities, because we don't fit within that perfect model that's been laid by powerful white men. Yeah, so just stick to it and be brave, and I think we have a lot to learn from young people as well.
Trevor, actually, at one point you mentioned, getting beyond the kind of, maybe the echo chamber is a way of putting it, of our own communities or our own industry. What is a way that you'd like to maybe break down that wall that Elle-Maija is talking about?
We should have an Indigenous prime minister. We should have Indigenous people that are in power. That you know, in the United States, we had somebody like Obama, which was like an inspiration. They had the whole like Hope campaign, but we've never actually seen that in with us. Like we have the Assembly of First Nations and stuff, but we don't have somebody in Parliament right now. Besides, I think there is one gentleman that's in a Parliament, but he's not. Yeah, but he's not up there making the decisions, and like we have to have somebody that's up there in government making like strong decisions for our people that is able to help translate that to all the youth and then everybody else, that we can see that we have somebody really strong that we can give us hope.
You mentioned allyship and ways that other racialized people can ally up, and I think that that's happening. It's definitely happening. We're seeing it here in this room, and that goes back to this this issue of racialized people doing all of this labor, carrying the burden of representation on our backs, and continually saying, "This is what's wrong with the industry. This is what we want to see different." So I actually want to see settler performers be our allies. I want to see them not take roles when they know that people like us are being misrepresented. I want to see them actually putting themselves on the line, because they don't have to do that, you know? How nice would it be just to be able to like be anyone you want in any sort of role, because that's what exists, you know? I would really love to see settler performers just put themselves on the line and be allies and say no, and to actually speak up. And I know that that's really tough for performers, because again, we are kind of like the lowest on the ladder when it comes to this industry, unless you're like number one, as they put it. But I would like to see settler performers also, you know, making sacrifices that we have to do all the time.
Mm-hmm. That's something, it's in theater, so it's different, but last year in Calgary, at Theatre Calgary, I was directing a show written by natives, and I brought in a full native crew to the theater, and we took over the whole place, and it's like an A house. So that to me is really important with allies too, is that because they hold the power. So I think what needs to happen is continue creating safe spaces and then step back too, so that we can do what we do and allow that to be done without the lens, the white lens all the time.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone for coming out, all of our panelists. Thank you to UBCP, ACTRA, Diversity and Inclusion Committee for hosting this, and I think it was a wonderful conversation. I hope you thought so too.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank all of you too. It was a really wonderful experience.
I feel the same way.
It was okay.